The authors of Christ Before Jesus claim that in 144 AD, a man named Marcion published the first gospel called Evangelion. Now, there's a lot of problems with this. Now, first off, this gospel was never called the Evangelion. In fact, the term Evangelion just means the gospel. Marcion never actually named his gospel. That's just what people called it. They called it Marcion's gospel. It doesn't actually have a formal name, and this is something that the authors of Christ Before Jesus get wrong over and over again because they simply don't know Greek. But what about the bigger issue? Is this gospel the first one to be published? Not at all. Now, how do we know this? Well, we have references to prior gospels before 144 AD. For instance, we have Papias, who actually mentions Mark, and he was writing within the first decade of the 2nd century. We also have a few other allusions to the Gospels. So we have people like Ignatius of Antioch as well as Polycarp who don't necessarily mention the Gospels by name, but they allude to these Gospels. Either way, though, we have clear evidence that the Gospel of Mark predates by decades any Gospel that Marcion might have published. Now, this actually causes a number of issues for Marcion, because if we actually look at Mark and Marcion's Gospel, which we don't actually have Marcion's Gospel, but we do have kind of a reconstruction of it based on Luke, we can see that a lot of what's in Mark is actually also in Marcion's Gospel, or it's also in Luke. And that means that Marcion, if he actually wrote a Gospel, would have copied from Mark. Marcion probably didn't copy from Mark because Marcion didn't actually write a gospel. Instead, what we are told by early church fathers is that Marcion actually took the Gospel of Luke and cut it apart. Now, to be fair, scholars have come up with other ideas that may explain this. Some have suggested that maybe there was a proto-Luke, that there was a Lucan gospel that was prior to Luke and Marcion that both of these figures ended up using. Or they suggest maybe the Marcion gospel was a proto-Luke. So no, Marcion's gospel is not the first gospel. Mark precedes Marcion's gospel by decades, and this really causes a number of issues for Christ Before Jesus because, well, with Mark, we have earlier evidence that people were writing about Jesus a lot earlier than Marcion, so they can no longer claim that Marcion invented it at all, or was the one who kind of pushed this narrative. So, yeah, that is kind of one of the strongest points against the book Christ Before Jesus because, well, Mark existed at least in the first decade of the 2nd century and most likely long before that. Now, in a future video, we'll actually get into the dating of Mark and why it might actually be considered something that was written in the 40s. So, yeah, stick around for that.